Hello and welcome to Zerogokin Reviews. Snail Shell is back with their latest figure, Victoria, who has a secret. Although not really. You could say they're completely upfront with this release. Although still not really, because this actually comes with two separate figures, Front Armor Girl Victoria and No Armor Girl Victoria. You can also mix and match them to get Top Armor Girl Victoria and Bottom Armor Girl Victoria. Of course, as you must be aware by this point, in addition to being a hack, I have completely sold out, as I got this for free from Hobbylink Japan. More on that later. So why does this look like this? What, is she stupid? Maybe. Perhaps this was designed with survivorship bias based on like one person back when people only had muskets. No. Well, maybe actually, but no. This was designed by Articulation, whose original design work and art style I don't really like. They're not by any means a bad artist, but their stuff is certainly not for me, which is why I originally wasn't too interested in this. Even when the promotional images dropped, there did not exist shits for me to give. Then it came out, and so did shit, because I started seeing a lot of really great in-hand photos, which convinced me to try and get one. I now understand why the Snail Shell Twitter account spam retweets these. They want me to shit. There is still some weirdness with the eyes, because they're articulated, which I'll get into too much detail about later, and unfortunately the new backdrop looks kinda like a horror movie, so this might look creepier than it actually is. That being said, while I don't like the original artwork, and I don't like the veil so you won't be seeing much of that, as a figure this design is great. It's like Saber but without the baggage. Or I guess the most similar thing I can think of is Batch, the Black Knight from 5-Star Stories. He's even got the round shield and bitchin' heels. The armor design is definitely more akin to something on a robot than any more conventional kind of worn armor, which is explained by how Articulation designed a lot of Mecha Musume. The shapes of the plates are bulky and decently complex, which does contrast really well with the not completely open back. It's a bit funny that in the last review, I spent a lot of time criticizing the practicality of the armor design, and here I'm praising the least practical shit imaginable. Yet somehow the chest plate is better designed. I don't care much about No Armor Girl. The most interesting thing about it is that even without any armor, she's managed to find something to skimp out on, which I at least appreciate her consistency. Watch my other videos to hear me talk about this more, but as always, Snail Shell seems allergic to lower body garments that aren't high cut, despite how you can't cut the articulation in a way that will maintain the continuity of the ass. Speaking of which, articulation is quite good as usual. Just keep in mind that because the parts are made to be interchangeable with each other, including other Snail Shell figures, there can be some that are too loose. This isn't that common, but like everything in life, you are at the mercy of RNGesus. Pray for your soul. Articulation range, however, isn't too different from contemporary Figmas, as the range on those is somewhat recently updated, except for this really extensive kick, which unfortunately not only breaks the sculpt like crazy, but also makes me die a little on the inside. It reminds me of that demonstration I did of how you shouldn't design legs. Fortunately, it can do more reasonable poses without breaking the sculpt. You'd think the armor would cover this, but the armored version actually can't do this at all, due to some design differences. I will say though, while the armored version is basically the same, the body of the non-armored version is more articulated than Milk Tea Girl, which is appreciated. A usual staple of Snail Shell figures is the articulated eyes, which are a neat option. However, as a reviewer, I've grown a lot more mixed on these. Most of the time spent recording the last Snail Shell review I did was me losing my fucking mind about getting the eye placement to not look like ass. For more general collectors, a problem you might have with these is that, like any kind of plastic articulation, you need to have separate parts that can get in the way of the continuity of the ass. No, not the ass. You need to have separate parts that can get in the way of the continuity of the figure, which in theory shouldn't be a problem at all, since your eyeballs aren't supposed to look like they're fused with your skin. If yours do, I recommend seeing someone about that. But the problem is that anime figures are not entirely 3D. The eye area is usually made relatively flat, so the eyes can just be printed on as a 2D element. But here, the eyes have definition strictly for the articulation, and are otherwise not designed any differently. These are details you can add, so why not? Well, the most obvious answer is that it's just easier. But here's a related question. Have you ever noticed that hot toy figures don't have eyelashes? Well, they do, but they're not realistic. Despite that, they can look pretty lifelike. The reason this works is because, on real people, the eyelashes are a fairly small detail, but for anime characters, depending on the art style, eyelashes can be an extremely prominent detail. So what do? Would fully sculpting them at this scale even work? Considering how thin it would be, probably not. Something you can do is to just sculpt them at partial depth. But if you're compromising by making it less 3D, and similarly weird, why not just make it a 2D element to begin with? And here lies what I think is the reasoning. Although I don't actually know what I'm talking about, I just would like to see some variation in this area, especially for 1/4 scale figures. It's always bothered me a bit that the face sculpts on those tend to be as defined as much smaller figures. Anyway. It's kind of a shame that this is the last major segment of the review, because unless you consider the entire second figure one, accessories are not this figure's strong point. Faces are pretty good, except this one, which is probably a defect. Where did the teeth go? Even the shape is all fucked up. Fucked up to a much lesser degree for a different reason. The hands come in 5 pairs, which because only one of her hands is armored, it's actually 3 pairs for each figure. But because both figures are the same character, in practice it's actually just 3. They're otherwise fine, but it is a bit of a bummer. Unlike her musket, which I mean, if this armor's gonna work anywhere, it's probably in a firing line. The design for it is very good. Like all great sci-fi guns, it's a long square, also known as a rectangle. It's basically a sleeker lasgun. You can detach the bayonet and the magazine, which thankfully don't come off too easily. The shield, on the other hand, is annoyingly attached with a magnet. I get why they did it, but it kinda fucking sucks. Unfortunately, it'd probably be terrible, but I kinda wish you could do that with stands. So you can keep the figure up, but also not have a hole in the back. Because fuck claw stands. Alright. You now get clear stands instead of those old bricks you'd get, which were cool and came with storage, but they took up too much space for figures that aren't all that big. Guts, Mazinger, Ludens. Overall, neat concept. I do have some complaint, but I can get behind this. The price isn't the best, but it's more reasonable considering this comes with 2 figures. So I can recommend this if you can get behind it and don't mind the price. Fuck.
在庫商品を 5% オフするにはコード055を使用してください。
They didn't ask me to do this, but they also have the most recent Snail Shell pre-order for a really good price. That's about it, thank you to the patrons. Showing thine ass in battle is pretty fucking stupid, like this patron. Thank you to Hobbylink Japan for the figure, they've been pretty great to work with. Of course, thank you to Photon Lab Reviews for their recording contributions, and I'll see y'all next time.
As we can.